The problem with organic chemistry in general is that for most students, this is a new way of learning, a new way of studying. When you took general chemistry and you learned reactions, it looked something like this. You have water that goes to H plus and OH minus in equilibrium, the autoionization of water. Or if you want a proper balanced reaction, it's two water molecules giving you H3O plus and OH minus. I'm using this as a very simple example to show you the difference between them, because once you get to organic chemistry, you'll see that same reaction again, the dissociation of water. But this time, the question that you're answering is not just what happens, we're looking at exactly why and how and the very specifics. And so if I start with the same two molecules of H2O that I have here in this reaction, in organic chemistry, we're paying attention to the electrons, how they move, the bonds that break, the bonds that form. So for example, if I show you the lone pairs of electrons over here, will show one of these lone pairs reaching for hydrogen, the partially positive hydrogen on water, because it's a polar bond. That will grab the hydrogen, form a bond, but hydrogen cannot have two bonds. And so this one will collapse back onto the oxygen atom, and that is how we get our product, which shows these two electrons now as a bond between oxygen and hydrogen. And if that second oxygen had two lone pairs, it now gets that third lone pair. Whoops, wrong color. And in organic chemistry, you show exactly what happened, where the electrons moved, and how they happened, which in itself sounds pretty straightforward. But let me know in the comments if you're taking organic chemistry this summer, is this your first time? Meaning, are you taking Orgo 1 for the first time? Or are you retaking Orgo 1 or even taking organic chemistry 2? So you've been exposed to Orgo, whether the first time or a retake. And if you're watching the replay, let me know in the comments. I do try to go through all the YouTube comments. And so I want you to participate with me no matter when you're watching this session. Because in organic chemistry, you go to lecture, you're learning a molecule. Now, students who have already taken some organic chemistry, let me know if this looks pretty accurate or kind of accurate. In lecture, you'll see a molecule that looks like this, and you're learning about, say, alkene reactions, pi bond reactivity, and what'll happen. Then you go home, you sit down to do your homework, and the molecule kind of still looks familiar because there's that pi bond, and you know that it's the same pi bond that you learned in lecture, but now the homework is a little bit more difficult. And you're thinking, okay, I can still do this. I recognize the structure. And this is where I need your input. Tell me if I am exaggerating or if I am on point. You show up to your exam, and the molecule for your alkene reactions looks kinda, sorta, something like, we'll throw another benzene ring in here for fun. I'll keep it consistent. Looks something like this. And that is the exam. I see in the comments, I agree, so accurate. The problem is that when you approach organic chemistry the way most students do, it's very easy to get overwhelmed, confused, and lost because what on earth is going on here? Because Janella agrees with me. Roma asks, why are exams so much harder? I'm a smiling shadow says 100%. If you memorize it and you expect to see this, you're lost. You're not getting anything out of this exam. But if you recognize that regardless of what is going on, I just have to react to pi bond. I'm doing homework and I just have to react to pi bond. Just ignore everything else. And then you get to your exam. Just recognize, well, you have two of them, but I just have to react to pi bond. The fact that everything else is there, you just have to learn to ignore it, unless, of course, the rest of the molecule is also reactive. So that's the first thing before we talk about any tips for surviving organic chemistry. You have to recognize the pattern, the concept. Make sure that you don't just approach this with memorization of something that you recognize oh, this is a pi bond, this is what I memorize. You have to make sure that you go through it and ask yourself, why does this happen? How does this happen? Why and how are the most important question. You want to look for the patterns of all the reactions. But what I showed you here only explains why organic chemistry itself is so difficult. Summer organic chemistry is a completely different and more difficult beast. Now, before I continue, for students who just joined me, for a copy of today's live stream session notes, along with the notes for any other live stream that you see on my channel and the bonus practice worksheets that go with those live streams, go to leahforsci.com/orgo live and you'll get all of that sent to you. If you've signed up in the past, make sure you sign up again to get the updated version that has all the newer links and all the newer PDFs as well. We know why organic chemistry itself is difficult, but let me know in the comments, what about taking organic chemistry in the summer just makes it so much more difficult and so much more common or likely for students to struggle? Yamal, I don't understand your comment. The first and biggest issue with summer Orgo is that because the summer class is so fast, what you're learning, there is so much to learn and there's so little time. There's not enough time for all the things that you need. For example, there's not enough time to process. Just think about when you hear something new. You hear it, you're confused, you watch a video, you sleep on it, you let it sink in, you come back with fresh eyes, you come back with a fresh mind, having rested, having slept, having had time pass, and you slowly get to process the information, not in the summer. On the theme of not enough time, there's not enough time to practice. During the regular semester, I took organic chemistry over the fall and spring. And I think we had class Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That means I had class on Monday. I had the entire day or the next day to practice. Then I had a lecture, and then I had another 48 hours to practice. I had the entire weekend to practice. In summer organic chemistry, you're flying at a rate of 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 chapters a week. When are you supposed to get all that practice done if tomorrow you're already on new material? Because it's going so fast, there's not enough attention from your professor. Your professor is not going to sit in office hours for hours and hours every day, so you don't have the ability to ask as many questions as you would during the regular semester. And another issue that students don't necessarily recognize as an issue for summer class is that life still goes on. During the regular semester, if you get sick and you miss a couple of days, you have a chance to catch up. If you have a family event or a holiday or just something important, you have a chance to catch up. But in a summer class, life is happening and you have to day after day just forget everything else, focus on class, focus on just what is going on, and it becomes really difficult to balance with so much pressure with everything else going on. And in the comments, Amira says it's so much faster. Alyssa says time. Janella says 10 weeks being online. I didn't find anything in person in such a short amount of time. Wow. So online kind of makes it harder because you don't have that in-person, let's show up and be there together. When I took organic chemistry, it was at 8 o'clock in the morning, but we were all there suffering together, and something about that made it tiny more endurable. And Nirmal says, finding reasons for even silly things. I don't understand what you're trying to say, Nirmal. Go ahead and clarify so that I can understand what you're saying. Guys, let me also just give you a heads up. I hear my baby crying. My husband's going to go to him, but if I have to go, I may have to step away for a moment, and I promise I'll be right back. Usually just needs a minute or two for me to show him that I'm still here. He thinks I leave in the middle of the night. So knowing the issue with summer Orgo, In addition to everything else you have heard about being successful in organic chemistry, the two things that you're going to need to make organic chemistry in the summer successful is one, a schedule. I know this sounds silly, but to think I am going to dedicate all of my remaining hours to studying is not enough. To think I'm going to put X amount of time per day is not enough. You want to have a very disciplined schedule where you allocate this is the amount of time I'm going to dedicate to organic chemistry each day of the week. When you know what else has to happen, I'll go into the schedule in more detail. And in fact, if you guys want, I'll even do a couple of sample study blocks so you can see how to structure your schedule. And within that, you also have to learn to triage. Of all the things that would make you successful in organic chemistry, if you had all that time, that would be great. In the summer, you do have to learn to pick and choose and say, these are the 5 things I technically have to do. But if I don't have enough time, let me focus on this thing or that thing, let the other thing go. And sometimes that means moving on when you have not completed the chapter. Sometimes that means moving on when you haven't finished all the practice. Learning how to triage, learning what to keep and what to skip, that is part of the challenge, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. Let's take a look at the study schedule. I hear him screaming. Let me just tell my husband. Okay, so with the study schedule, we said that it's important to have the study blocks. And in those study blocks, you want to be very disciplined, but you want to use that schedule as a template. If you try to rigidly stick to it 1,000%, you're going to find yourself very stressed and very burnt out. To build that schedule, the first thing you want to do is don't start with organic chemistry. That is the last thing you put on your schedule because you want to make sure that everything else is accounted for. The first thing you want to put on your schedule is everything time sensitive. The idea with this is if you have things that are very important, for example, dropping your kids off at daycare, showing up to work on time, going to church on a certain day of the week, these are things that have to happen at a specific time. Put those on the schedule first. The second thing you want to put on the schedule are things that are required but not necessarily time sensitive. You want to put your sleep, you want to put your personal hygiene, you want to put time for meals, for grocery shopping, for chores. Try to look at your schedule and ask yourself what absolutely has to get done. What is the quickest and most efficient way that I can do it? So, for example, if you're cooking dinner, cook for 3 days. Just cook extra and you'll eat the same thing 3 days in a row, but then you don't have to cook tomorrow and the day after. The third thing, we're still not looking at organic chemistry, is going to be sanity time. You absolutely have to have downtime. Not a lot. You can't afford it in the summer, but you absolutely need to have your sanity time. And that includes a little bit of winding down time. After you finish studying for the night, you have maybe 30 minutes where you watch a show, then you give yourself a digital curfew, you do your chores, you take a shower, whatever, you go to sleep. You can't go from books to sleep to wake up to responsibilities. You will burn out. Look at this schedule and ask yourself, does everything there have to be there? And then finally you put in organic chemistry or whatever other classes you're taking. And you try to give yourself very specific study blocks. I have 2 hours after class. I have 2 segments of 3.5 hours each day of the weekend, and try to structure your days that way. With that in mind, how much time do you see yourself being able to allocate on a daily and then weekly basis to organic chemistry? Go ahead and put it in the comments. Alessandra asks, how do I fit in time to at least exercise regularly? That is I would consider that a requirement. So, depending on how busy you are, what else you have going on, for me personally, I found the best way to do that is to wake up before my family. I go to a CrossFit class at 7 a.m. By the time I come back, I spend time with my son, and then he goes to daycare. I start my workday. You can use your workouts in middle of the day as a break. If you don't want to do anything formal like the gym, just take 10 to 15-minute walking breaks. Wake up, go for a walk, start your day. Lunch break, go for a walk, eat your lunch. After you're done studying, go for a walk. That will keep you healthy, that will keep you sane. And on those walks, you can listen to music or a podcast, something you enjoy. I'm listening to an audiobook right now on my walks, and that's my way of having a break. Survival Dude says, I have had good experience with walking and going over Anki cards. If you're in a safe area where having your phone out is not a problem, then that works. If you're not comfortable holding your phone, because it's not really a good idea between just making sure you have awareness of what's going on around you, or if you have to cross streets and there's traffic going on. In that case, I would recommend headphones. Maybe have one in your ear, one out, and you can listen to a video or something similar if you want to study. So those are tips for being able to add studying in the non-study time. But I also want you to have concrete study blocks where you know this is how many hours I'm going to study on any given day. Okay. So ideally for a summer class, I know you're not going to like to hear this, but during the regular semester, I ask for at least 10 hours a week. During the summer semester, I like to see 20 plus hours if possible, because if you think about it, a regular semester at minimum 10 hours a week over 14 weeks is 140 hours. If your semester is 7 weeks, well, the same amount of hours would be 20 hours a week. If it's more condensed, ideally you try to find a little bit more. Another tip is specifically for students who have not started yet, because when I talk to many of you in email before starting this session, I heard from students who are already in their summer class, but students who are not starting for a couple of days or even a couple of weeks. And so if you have time, because your semester, your class has not started yet, you want to get ahead as much as you can. So if possible, and what this will do is make sure that when the class picks up at 1,000 miles per hour, you are already ahead, and therefore it takes you a bit longer before you start feeling the stress and before you start feeling behind. Let me know in the comments if you have not yet started your your semester, and that means you have some time. And if yes, how much time you have. Depending on your available schedule until your summer class begins, the first thing that you would want to do in getting ahead are any prereqs for the class. So it's not necessarily about getting ahead with the information you're about to study. So for example, if you're going into Orgo 1, one really good way to get ahead is to review your Gen Chem basics, the foundations that will lead into organic chemistry. I don't mean the basics of atoms and isotopes. I'm talking about the things that will feed into organic chemistry 1. And you know what, let me link it under the video after I'm done. But this includes things like Lewis bond structure, polarity, hybridization, maybe even some resonance if you learned it. And if you're about to start Orgo 2, what if you quickly review Orgo 1? Now, you're not necessarily going to be able to restudy everything, but if you review the basics of reactions, some good topics to review for Orgo 2 are your basics of alkene, alkyne, retrosynthesis, most definitely substitution elimination, but also some of the non-reaction concepts like chirality and stereochemistry or acid-base chemistry. Nucleophile versus base kind of fits in there, but understanding what makes something strong and weak so that you are ready to pick up the new information when it builds on the old information. The absolute worst thing you would want to do is show up to class And not only are you not ready to keep up, you don't even know what you need to know to understand what is happening. The second thing in getting ahead is actually just to pre-study the new information. And this doesn't have to be the entire semester. Just pick a goal and pre-study. So for example, maybe you learn the first day's material, maybe you learn the first chapter, maybe you learn up to the first exam. But whatever you can do to get ahead means it'll take you even longer to fall behind, and that will help you keep up with the rigorous schedule. So for the student who emailed me June 24th for Orgo 2, you have a couple of weeks. In these couple of weeks, you can realistically review all of Organic Chemistry 1, and you will feel so much more confident with the new material because you're coming in with a solid foundation. So this is somewhat related. I struggle finding good practice problems. My professor gives very easy problems, but the tests do not match. So Carly, there are a couple of resources I have on my website, and I also put practice problems as bonus worksheets for any live stream topic that I do. And so make sure that you sign up using the link on the screen, leahforsyth.com/orgolive, because that way you can get access to all those practice. I also have quizzes on my website, which are more difficult than the worksheets, but that will give you even more practice. Janella started 5/9. Wow, so you're already well into the semester, but you can apply the next piece. If you can't get ahead, you can at least continue to keep up. Amira recommends organic chemistry as a second language. I didn't know it's available free online, but yes, that is also something that I absolutely recommend. All right, so if you have time, you can get ahead. What about once the summer semester actually begins, or for students already in the summer semester? What does that summer schedule look like? Within your study blocks, you want to have distinct components to your studying rather than just, I'm going to sit down and do the best I can, get the most information possible. Before lecture, this is really, really important and the most overlooked piece of doing well in a fast-paced class. Before lecture, the key is pre-exposure. Most of the time, students will show up to class ready to learn new information they know nothing about, expecting the professor to teach. Now, if you happen to be one of the lucky few where your professor actually teaches well, that is amazing. And let me know in the comments if you have a professor like that. For most students, the professor is kind of confusing and the information is not easy to follow. And now, even if you do have a good professor and the information makes sense, it's still a lot really, really fast. But if you can show up to lecture having some pre-exposure to the material, having an idea of what the heck is going to be talked about today, then you tend to listen a lot better. You pay better attention, you focus more, and you're actually learning. Any questions that you had with your pre-study, with your pre-exposure now get answered. You know when to answer follow-up questions. And here's something very important. If you are familiar with what is to come, then as you're listening in lecture, you can pick up on the little things. If your professor is really into one reaction and glances over another, you know where to focus your studying afterwards. But if you're so overwhelmed because you've never seen this before, you're less likely to pick up those little things. And then, well, you might just have to study a bit more, which is not the end of the world, but it definitely helps. Amira has a flipped class, assigns the videos before class. That is amazing, Amira, because that means that you show up to class already having done the pre-exposure, ready to pick up the new information. Then after lecture, this is what most students think of as studying, but this is where you want to be careful with what you study. There is the learn part, what the heck is going on. There's the understanding part to make sure that you actually get it. There is practice. Learn and understand is actually together, so I'm just going to move that here. Right? When you're learning, you're making sure that you understand. Practice is to make sure that it's not just a concept that you get, but that you can actually do the problem, the reaction, the mechanism, the synthesis over and over. And separate from that is memorization. Now, if you've watched a lot of my videos, you know my motto: understand, don't memorize. But it's really understand and then memorize, because at the end of the day, you do have to know what a ketone looks like. And you do have to know the reagent for an oxidation reaction, whether you want it to go from an alcohol to an aldehyde or all the way to a carboxylic acid. And the last piece to studying is before exams, because this is a different kind of studying. This is review and mixed topics, because on your exam, it's not just an alkene exam, an alkyne exam. It's an exam that could be alkene, alkyne, SN2, radicals, and everything else. With this general structure, most students fall into the trap of too much studying, not enough understanding, too much memorization, and not enough practice. So I recommend going through it in cycles. Learn, understand, practice, then memorize. Or you could probably do learn, understand, memorize, and then practice, so that you have the information. Now, the balance here is to make sure that you do break this up and you get a little bit of each. But you also want to make sure, let's add in review, you also want to make sure that as you're learning tomorrow's chapter and the next day's chapter and the next day's chapter, you're not forgetting what you learned yesterday and the day before and the day before. So let me know in the comments if your biggest concern is, even if you keep up with the class, how will you remember what you learned one chapter ago, 2 chapters ago, 5 chapters ago, 10 chapters ago, when your pace is about that of a speeding bullet and you're barely keeping up? Question: fully online, all the videos are posted. How should I go about that? You would go through it the same way, but instead of before lecture pre-exposure, you would just treat this as one. You would start here where the learning and understanding is watching the lecture. And the fact that you're here on a YouTube live stream, I assume that you're also coming to YouTube for supplemental information. And so what I would recommend is you learn from what your professor has provided online. If that's not enough and you need help with understanding, come to YouTube, come to my videos, watch, practice, memorize, review, and then just repeat the cycle for each chapter to make sure that you're constantly following along, constantly understanding. So Laura says, yes, retainment can be very difficult. So Laura, I want to show you how to combine the ability to retain, and let me know in the comments if, even though you know that you have to study, study, study all summer, do you find that it's very scary and difficult to sit down and open your book, open the chapter, because subconsciously you know how difficult it is, so it's you don't want to get started. You know you have to, but it's too scary. What we want to do is make sure that it's not as scary, because you're starting with something more fun, something less painful. So what would a typical session look like? Let's take a look at these 3 and how we would mix it together. Here is my ideal recommended study session to help you get ahead and keep up at the same time. The first thing you want to do is start with review. Consider this a combination of a warm-up and also making sure that it's an easier start. You don't want to jump right into the deep end of the freezing cold water. You want to get comfortable. You want to look at something you know, something you've already done, something that is not so scary. And as a bonus, this is going to make sure that you won't forget the old material. If every day you open with review of old material, you're constantly seeing the previous chapters. You never give yourself a chance to forget. After you're warmed up, and your brain is in the zone and you feel comfortable, now going to the new material is not as scary. And going to the new material would be a combination of videos, your books, practice, and active writing. This is the method that I recommend for memorization, a method that doesn't just give you facts, but actually helps you understand. I'm going to put the active writing link into the video description here when I'm done so that you'll have everything in one place. And then actually, let me get rid of the active writing because the last piece that I recommend is active writing memorization. After you're done studying, then you want to have a dedicated active memorization session so that you can say, this is everything I've done today. It made sense. I did practice. I got it. Now let me make sure that it sticks in my memory. So let me know if you have any questions on this. And as a reminder, you can get a copy of today's live stream notes, all the previous live streams that I've done, the notes and the bonus worksheets by going to layatfirstlight.com/Orgo live. Okay, let's keep the questions specific to what I'm teaching now, and then we can do separate Q&A at the end. All right, so within this structure, let's take a look at a couple of sample study blocks. And I should add one more. If you're studying for the night, like this is your, I just got home, I have a couple hours to study and I have a session tomorrow. What I would also add in here is preview for tomorrow. If you have a new topic coming up, because in organic chemistry, in summer Orgo, you tend to learn a new topic every day. Another option for previewing for the next day is or an hour before class. If you can wake up an hour early and maybe go to the gym. I had a student who was studying with me over the summer, and she would go to the gym, put the treadmill at a really low speed, and then just watch videos on the treadmill. So you can get a workout in. It's not going to be a very intense workout, but at least you're not sitting and watching. And maybe for an hour before lecture, you watch the new material. But if not, let me show you a couple of different samples of how you can break it up. Now, a 3-hour study block is typical for students who are taking classes and then have lab, come home, have some chores, dinner. 3 hours could be maybe partly before dinner, partly after dinner. But ideally, I'd love to see you putting in 3 hours a day. 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's 15 hours. And then find another 5 maybe on a Saturday, take Sunday off. And that's a pretty solid summer schedule. Now, I want to confirm that a 3-hour study block is not 3 actual hours of studying. This is 3 hours of time. So maybe 5 to 8 p.m. What would that look like? The first 25 minutes would be review. This is where you review yesterday's chapter, the chapter from the day before, a difficult chapter from last week that you feel like you could benefit from a little more review. This could be watching a video on that chapter. If you're already familiar, maybe watching the video at 1.5 speed, skimming the chapter, skimming your notes, just 25 minutes of immersing yourself in something that you know, but you can benefit from seeing again so that you don't forget or that it doesn't become hazy. Then you want to take a breather. This is a 3 to 5 minute, well, after 25 minutes, maybe a 2 to 4 minute sanity break. Just close your eyes, do some deep breathing. I like to make my breaks excuses to get up. So I'll go get a drink, I'll go to the bathroom, I'll go get a snack. Just something that gets me out of my chair because I have a very bad habit of being able to sit for a couple of hours when I get into something. My ADHD works 2 ways. If something is hard for me to focus, my brain is all over the place. But if I get in the zone, I have a hard time getting out of the zone and then I burn out. So I find excuses to get up and have a snack, have a drink, go to the bathroom. If I keep drinking, I have to keep going to the bathroom. So I keep that cycle of having to take a break. Or you could just put your head down for 2 minutes. Then you're going to have 2 hours of studying. Now, this is not memorization. This is 2 hours of studying, which will be watching a video, reading your book, doing practice. And remember, I said triage? So I want you to choose ahead of time and say, this is what I'm going to focus on today. And if you only have 2 hours, then maybe you make it 2 hours, that's 120 minutes, 40 minutes each, maybe like 30 to 40 minutes each. So it'd be 30 to 40 minutes of watching video, 30 to 40 minutes of reviewing your book, 30 to 40, maybe a little bit more minutes of practice, a quick breather in between. But you cannot afford to fully dig in the way someone who has 10 hours to study this chapter will. You have to force yourself to move on. And by telling yourself, these are the predetermined things that I'm going to do for this amount of time, that's it. You do that and you're done. So I would recommend books and videos for an hour and practice for an hour. You want to give yourself as much time to practice as you do for learning, because when you practice, you identify gaps, you look up answers, you look up explanation, solution, you learn from it, but you also get better and better at the practice. Too many students in very little time focus only on learning, and then they can't apply what they learn, then they struggle in class. You're going to take another breather. So if you're doing the math with me, that's 2.5 hours already. We have about 30 minutes left. And these 30 minutes could be broken up in one of two things. 30 minutes could be a mix of preview tomorrow. So if you have another lecture tomorrow, you will be so much better off if you take 30 minutes to preview tomorrow and or active writing memorization from everything that you learned today. So that could be maybe 15 minutes watching a short video on tomorrow's topic, 15 minutes of memorization. Or if you're going to do the idea I mentioned earlier, where you're watching a video in the morning before lecture, maybe even on the bus on the way to class, maybe listening in your car, not looking at your screen, though, flip your phone over. You don't want to get into an accident, but you could be listening to kind of pick it up. Then you can use the entire 30 minutes for active memorization. This is if you have a 3-hour block, and hopefully you have 2 to 3 hours at the end of the day. Let me know in the comments if this is something that you see yourself sticking to. Person whose name is in another language that I can't pronounce, let's keep the comments relevant to this at hand. So if you have any questions or comments on this, definitely go ahead and type it in. Question: you are calling us out with the facts, describing what we do and fall into. Janella, I'm not sure what you mean. Are you saying that what I mentioned a lot of students do is what you have been doing? And if yes, then follow-up question for you. Do you see yourself changing it so that you can keep up and still learn and still practice? You're not going to necessarily get into as much detail as you would in the fall semester, but this keeps you on your toes, keeps you moving ahead, and constantly keeps you learning the new information. Now, what if you only have an hour? This is not an entire hour for the day, but what if you have a schedule where you have an hour in the morning, you go to lecture, you have an hour break, then you eat lunch, then you go to lab, then you maybe have an hour after work, and you want to make sure, or class or lab or whatever you have going on. If you have an hour and you want to get all this done in 1 hour, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways, sample 1 hour blocks. But ideally, please find more than an hour a day to study. But if you have maybe one day you have an hour, the next day you have 5, this is what you can do with it. If you have more than one hour block, then you can actually break this up and do it that way. Or let me give you a couple of structures that students have liked in the past, and then you can see which one you want to follow. One option is 1 hour AM. This is before lecture for new material. That is not really a structure for the study block. This is a recommendation. If you have an hour the night before a new topic, here is how you can make that the most productive hour possible. 10 minutes is going to be review today's material, what you covered today. And hopefully this is a little bit of a review so you can scan it. Then you take 10 minutes to practice. So hopefully you understand it well enough that you can do just a quick reaction, a couple of mechanisms. 10 minutes of memorization. So all those reagents that came up today, take 10 minutes to memorize. Then take a breather. Because this is on new topic this is on the focus of this block is if you have a new topic tomorrow. This is just to keep you up to date, but really I want you prepared for tomorrow because I think you're going to get a lot more out of it that way. Take 30 minutes to watch a video, maybe at a faster speed, on the new material. So you're not taking all your time for the new material, but this is going to get you prepared. Or you could also do this in the morning before you go to lecture if you have an hour. That is one option. And so that is technically the second option, right? Because this is the first option, the second option. The third option is if it's not a focus on, hey, I have a new topic tomorrow, but how can I make that 1 hour actually work for me anytime I have an hour to study? The first thing that I recommend is 10 minutes of review. This could be any past topic. The idea, again, is to make sure that the past material does not become foreign to you, and it's a warm-up. You don't want to jump right into the new material cold. Then I recommend 40 minutes of new material. This is not preview new material the way I described here. This is, I am learning the material that I just covered in class. I'm getting comfortable with a new chapter. So this is where you have videos, book, and practice. So this puts you at 50 minutes. You have a 2 to 4 minutes, just a breather because you don't want to necessarily sit for an hour. Close your eyes, take a couple of deep breaths. We're going to call this a 2-minute breather. You really can't afford to take more than that. And an hour isn't that long to study where you will be okay without a break. And that means you have less than 10 minutes for memorization. This one right here is the most popular 1 hour study recommendation. When I share with students, this is the one that students tend to like best because an hour is something you can very easily visualize in the morning, on your lunch break, after dinner, without overdoing it, without doing too much, but warming up, getting 40 minutes deep into new material, and then dedicated memorization, you will get the absolute most out of any hour you have ever studied doing it this way. And as a reminder, you don't have to copy any of this down because if you go to the link on the screen, I will send you the notes. No matter if you're here live or watching the recording, you'll get access to all of it. If you did have, okay, so where was I? Nope, I jumped ahead. The key with all of this is making sure that you do have the structure. What am I going to do? When am I going to do it? How am I going to do it? But don't just have this nice, pretty thing. Actually write out a study schedule. Mark it out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Which chapters am I going to do? If you have Monday, chapter 2, and 3, 4, well, this is maybe a little bit too fast, but if you have it set up where you're doing chapter 2, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 3, 4, 4, and so on, the tricky part is making sure you do go to chapter 3, even though you're not 1,000% in chapter 2. Because if you stay on chapter 2 until you're solid, and now your class is on chapter 4, when are you going to get to chapter 3? When your class is on 6, 7, or 8? So you have to be very, very disciplined in keeping up with it. With all of this in mind, do you see yourself being able to change how you've been approaching your summer studying, whether you're already in the class or in thinking about how you're going to study once your class begins? Do you see this giving you a better chance at constantly understanding, staying with it, keeping up with the class, and hopefully getting that A? Question. I find myself going over 3 hours and getting overwhelmed with trying to understand the material. So I want to challenge you. If it's taking you too long to understand the material, Maybe it's because the resource you're using is not clear enough. If you're trying to read the book and the book is not explaining it, you cannot afford to waste time on the book. You have to find a resource that works for you. And depending on how much time you have, I don't remember if you're already in your class, you have to quickly sort through all the possible resources and ask yourself, which one is going to not only help me understand, but also help me understand the fastest so that I'm not wasting time, because nothing works if you're not understanding it. You have to have a resource that explains it to you, that clearly gives you the information, that walks you through practice questions, and also the ability to ask questions. Because if you're stuck, you cannot afford to waste hours looking for answers. Okazaki Fragment, I love your name. I guess I'm lucky this summer as my exams are online and open note. I'm going to challenge you on that. Yes, taking an online open note exam is easier, but a lot of students get complacent when they see that because they think I don't have to study as well. I'm going to challenge that even though it's open notes, I want you to study as if you are not allowed to use any resources so that you should be able to quickly and comfortably answer questions. Remember what I showed you earlier, that your exams look like this? Whoops. And when your exams look like this, having your notes are not enough. I had an open note exam once and I studied for it as if it wasn't. And I saw my classmates just frantically flipping through their books and their notes, desperate to find the answers because they had the book, but they didn't know how to use it. Study as if it's a closed book exam. And then, if you need help with something like to look up a reagent or a specific mechanism, the notes are a backup, but not the thing you rely on. Is going into practice problems with a weaker than you'd like foundation on content an okay thing to do? I'm going to turn that question around on you. Can you afford not to start practicing if you are taking a longer time to get it? So, what I'd recommend is having a source of practice where you can learn from the questions. Get your foundation as efficient and strong as possible within the allocated time. And if you feel your time allocation is not enough, maybe try to find another way to maximize. Maybe start watching videos while you're eating lunch, listen to videos while you commute to class, change your workout in the gym where it's not as intense. So now you can watch videos while you're doing something slow, like the elliptical or the stationary bike. Find a way to learn more, but you absolutely have to have a hard deadline. This is when I switch to practice, because I don't want you to get into the trap of never feeling good enough and therefore never starting practice. Quick reminder, go to layitforsci.com/orgolive for a copy of today's session notes.